Pots. This game loves pots. We have throwable pots, wearable pots, pots for charms, and even pot enemies. With all these options, I thought it would be a good idea to make a pot and jar themed build, which I dubbed Lord of Pots. Here's how I'm going to structure this build and the rules for the run. First, I will use any item that is pot or jar themed. This includes charms, armor, and consumables. Also, the flask count as being pot or jar like. Perfume bottles do not count and won't be used in this run. The main items I'll be using are as follows: crack pots, ritual pots, soldiers of fortune ashes, the jar right puppet, and the jar cannon. Second, I must only do damage with pot or jar related items and summons. This means if I run out of all my items during a boss fight, I'm not allowed to start punching for damage. I will need to die and try again. Third and last is the goal, and it's to reach the end credits. With all that explained, let's get into the run. Starting the run requires a lot of gathering of materials, mainly the mini crack pots and ingredients that I'll need for damage. Once I gathered most of what I can get, I tested out damage on some of the weaker bosses. Bloodhound was no issue as he was basically a normal enemy with a boss health bar. Fought one of the Erd Tree avatars and Kaled, and this boss was also no problem as he is very weak to fire damage. Margit is the first great enemy I'll fight in this run. I start off by buffing my fire damage with the physics flask and use fire bombs for the whole fight. This fight isn't anything special, just need to dodge his long windups as usual and chuck the fire bombs from a good distance. He's not a boss that actively avoids ranged attacks, so it's pretty easy doing damage to him. That being said, my pots could still miss him. With 12 pots landed, the first important boss of the run was defeated. Next, I need to obtain the volcano pots, so I'll need to purchase the cookbook from the merchant in Mount Gelmir. After we buy the cookbook, I need to do a little bit of farming for the materials to craft the pots. With these pots, I can go to the Ariza side tomb in Altus Plateau and kill the boss located here so we can obtain our first summon, the Soul Jars of Fortune. First attempt was alright, and I was able to defeat him on the second attempt. Due to the volcano pots having a wide radius and lingering area of effect when it hits, I can throw it on the ground or a wall and bait the boss to stand in the damaging area. And with that, I have my first Spirit Ash. I need to gather the remaining crack pots that I currently have access to. There are 4 more that I can grab for a total of 19 pots. There is one more I can grab, but that'll have to wait until later. It's about time I fight Godric. This is another fight that isn't anything too crazy. I throw my pots when he's doing a controlled and mostly stationary combo. I do have to avoid throwing pots at him while he's charging up his tornado move, as any pots thrown will just be blown away. As I figured, my little pot summons are doing nothing and proceed to get one tapped at the start of the second phase. This is because any amount of fire damage they receive will cause them to ignite for a brief time and then explode. Second phase of this fight is more the same, and in my opinion even easier, as he likes to do these fire attacks, which allows me to throw my pots from a distance. With 14 good pots landed, Godric is defeated. Making my way to Renala, I need to get past the Red Wolf first. This boss is not hard, but I need to switch up the pots I use. Because this boss moves around so much, the volcano pots are not going to be ideal. Instead, I swap back to normal fire pots and take the wolf down using those. Then I just made my way to Renala. I don't plan on actually trying to fight her just yet, really just trying to test some damage. While working my way through the mobs in order to drop the boss's shield, I noticed something strange. The volcano pots are killing the enemies, but the boss's shield is not taking damage. I know punching the enemies is enough to cause shield damage to the boss, but for whatever reason, the damage from the volcano pots does not have the same effect. I know I'll need some other items, so I leave for now and head over to Karia Manor to grab the cookbook for freezing pots. There are a few easy bosses that I can get to quickly and kill for a decent amount of runes. I stopped over in Limgrave and killed the dragon there. He took a lot of damage from the volcano pots, especially when you throw them at his head. Then I went back to Kaled to get the bulk of the levels. The Putrid Avatar here gives 91,000 runes and luckily is very weak to fire damage. After that, I decided to kill some of the other avatars on the map. My little pots actually got the killing blow here. and finally took out the Tibia Mariner in Altus Plateau. I should be strong enough to take on Radahn now. To help with damage and my looks, I need to obtain the Jar Helmet. In order to get this item, I helped Alexander out of the hole he was stuck in. Then I went to fight Radahn. This fight took me many tries. I finally learned when and what attacks to throw my pots on. Even though Radahn is huge, he moves around so much that sometimes my pots will either miss him or his attack animation will move him out of the radius of the volcano pot. I also summoned Alexander for this fight for obvious reasons. He really doesn't do much for the first phase, but he's a champ when I summon him again for the second phase as he aggroes the boss's spiral attack. I completely ran out of volcano pots and I had one freezing pot on me. I don't have any way of farming the ingredients of the freezing pots at the moment, so I had to save it for the right occasion. Luckily, it causes frostbite to him right away and is enough damage to finish him off. With Radahn finally dead, I need to make one more stop. I head over to Mount Gelmir and talk to Alexander again. He gives me the item I need. This doesn't just make me look the part, but it also increases the damage my pots do, so it's a must for this run. I head back to Redmane Castle to fight the duo boss. This allows me to grab the cookbook for Redmane fire pots. Now it's time for Renala. In order to save as many pots as possible, I use my jar summons to take out the singing ads. Basically, I'm waiting behind pillars for my jars to finally aggro to the correct enemy. Notice I can kind of get them to move by going far away. They end up teleporting next to me. I got down to one pot boy left and he finally hit the last enemy. Immediately when the shield breaks, I chuck my damage boosting flask and start chucking volcano pots at her. Second phase isn't too bad as she mostly stands in one spot and casts spells. The annoying part starts when she summons. She moves around a bit more and I have to deal with dodging the summons. With a few pots to spare, the boss is defeated. Then I head over to Caria Manor to beat Loretta. Another boss in the easier end as long as I throw my pots when she's more stationary. After that, I progress Sullivan's questline and snag myself the Jarrite puppet summon. I went through bosses with my new summon and this puppet is a great addition to the build. Didn't realize the type of pots he throws are so useful. From poison pots to frostbite pots, I was just running through bosses. Fought Margit 2.0 as I was headed through the capital for some extra runes. The Draconic Tree Sentinel was easy as well. I missed a few of my pots and the boss ran out of some that did hit, but none of that mattered. My puppet was throwing frostbite pots at the boss and even poisoned him early in the fight. He really is a lot more useful than the little pot boys, but I have a feeling I'll need their help again later in the run. My summon dies, but I'm able to finish the fight without a problem. Then decided to take out the Erd Tree avatar located in the capital for extra runes as well. Next stop is Godfrey and Morgott. Godfrey was honestly a little annoying to fight. He didn't stay in one place very long, and whenever I did hit him with a volcano pot, he would either side dash out of the way or come charging straight at me. My best damage was probably when he was busy comboing the hell out of my summon, or when he would do his jumping throw attack. I had one pot left at the end of that fight. Then it was time to challenge Morgott, and to my surprise it was a lot easier than I was expecting. My puppet threw a frostbite pot and I was able to get a lot of hits in while Morgott was charging his spear attack. His sword rain attack is probably the easiest move to do a lot of damage as he doesn't move and I don't really need to avoid much. While he was doing that attack, I noticed my puppet had poisoned him as well. Second phase is a bit harder due to the boss's movement, but by the time he starts moving around in his second phase, he only has about a third of his health left. Then it just becomes the same game of waiting for a long wind-up attack where I can get distance and throw my pots. The poison is also doing a number on him as well. And just like that, we have another great enemy down. It seems like the rest of the run won't be too bad. Now that we're about halfway through the bosses, I want to transition to the farming that took place during this run. There are several spots I farm for ingredients to make my pots. Starting early in the game, I was only making fire pots, so I farmed mushrooms at the Agkiel Lake South site of Grace, and then smoldering butterflies by the fire slugs near War Master's shack. Eventually, when I got to Alta's Plateau, I would go to the slugs near the outer wall Phantom Tree site of Grace for the butterflies. Eventually, when I moved to Volcano Pots, I started out farming near the 9th site of Grace for volcanic stones, but eventually moved to farming along the path from Seethe Water River. I spent a lot of time in this spot and would gather about 100 or so volcanic stones on one trip. There are also a few mushrooms scattered in the area, which never hurts. For blood-tainted excrement, I have to farm them in Mogwin Palace since that's the only place they appear. For Rime Crystal Bud, which is used to make freezing pots, I go to the large trees located northwest in the consecrated snowfields. These are the only ingredients needed for freezing pots, making them one of my go-to pots to make. The blue crystals near the Scenic Isle site of Grace have some glintstone fireflies for magic pots. Then I go to the Lake of Rot for Aeonian butterflies and a couple of random spots around the map where I can find Trina's Lily. Now, these two ingredients do not regrow in the world, so I didn't want to use rot pots and sleep pots unless I felt the boss really called for it. They can technically still be farmed from some mobs that drop them, but I didn't want to waste time on killing loads of mobs unless I really needed those pots. Also, lastly, for toxic mushrooms, I went to the Heart of Aeonia site of Grace for 2 spawn points and Jarberg for Poison Blossom. With the farming explained, let's get to the second half of the game. It's time I add the jar cannon to my build. I head over to Volcano Cave and defeat the boss there for my only weapon. The boss here took a lot of damage from the volcano pots and was easy to beat. Now, the jar cannon only takes certain bolts, so I'll have to regularly stop by this merchant to buy more. I then need to upgrade my summon and weapon a little, so I run off to different areas to gather upgrade materials. I tested the damage out on Knight's Cavalry boss in Caelid, and this was not the best boss to test damage. The jar cannon was definitely useful in this fight, doing a lot of damage to both the boss and the horse, but this boss moves so much and the reload on the cannon is so slow that I have to take a hit after almost every shot. There are some other optional bosses I need to fight for the runes they drop. I started with the Scarlet Rot Dragon in Caelid. My puppet does not last very long because this boss's breath attacks are overpowered. Other than the Scarlet Rot, this dragon isn't too bad. Then I went to fight the other flying dragon in Caelid. This boss did not go as smoothly. This dragon is super resistant to elemental damage, so my volcano pots were not doing much. It's also fought on a small bridge, making attacks a bit harder to avoid. I struggled for a little while and I decided I would come back later. Then I traveled to Mount Gelmir to fight the full-grown Falling Star Beast. Nothing crazy about this fight. The jar cannon was pretty nice for shooting the boss's eye thing, but the long reload means I get hit a lot. I decided to fight the dragon again. I did most of my damage with the jar cannon this time. It went well, and for the last bit of his health he ended up getting stuck on a ledge next to the bridge, so finishing his health off was easy. For future bosses, I'm definitely going to need freezing pots, so I need to get to a certain place where I can farm the materials for them. I need to get past the Mimic tier, but I didn't feel like fighting it myself, so I let my puppet do all the work. After that, I made my way through the underground and went to the Lake of Rot in order to grab the cookbook for rot pots. I grabbed the first half of the secret medallion, so now I have to grab the second. That means I need to get past Commander Nile. This fight was annoying for a while due to the boss's summons. I kept trying to do damage to them at the worst times. After a couple of tries, I was able to get the summons down and focus on the boss. I did a majority of my damage while the boss was charging for one of his launch attacks. This was shown with the Frost Whirlwind he whips up. I would usually throw one pot, then roll from his attack. My puppet was also able to poison the boss. I eventually whittled most of the boss's health down with just my pots. I eventually ran out of pots and needed to use my cannon. I somehow did not get hit by his charge attack as I shot him and was able to defeat him with one more shot. Now I'm able to grab the other half of the secret medallion. Next important boss is Fire Giant, but before that I fight the Freezing Fog Dragon. just another dragon fight that isn't too bad. Now, I know my volcano pots are not going to do the trick because it's the fire giant, so I need some different pots. He has a weakness to magic, so I head to the lakes and grab the cookbook for magic pots. I then need to spend some time farming the ingredients that make the pots, which spawn on these giant blue crystals in the lake. The new magic pots scale with intelligence, so I head over to Renala and respec most of my levels into intelligence. The jar cannon has no scaling, so this won't affect the damage output of that. At this point, I've died to the giant twice and won't let it happen a third. I can summon Alexander and my puppet for this fight. The plan was to use mostly pots for the first half of the fight and then switch to the jar cannon in the second. It was a lot easier to hit the mess up leg with pots when he was aggroed onto one of my other summons. Also, I never knew you could summon Alexander for this fight and was not ready for the damage he was outputting. Alexander really didn't do anything in the Radon fight, but he sure as hell showed up for this one. When the second phase started, I focused on shooting jar cannon shots at the boss's giant eye and head. This phase was a lot of chip damage and running away from the boss's attacks. Alexander did a great job at the end, distracting the boss and even stunning him periodically. At the end, I did something stupid. I felt the jar cannon was not doing enough damage and believed I could finish him off with one more pot. So I ran up to him, hit him with a pot, and got him one hit away. Then I proceeded to miss the largest boss in the game twice. By the way, I was one hit at this point with no flasks left. I went back to a safe distance and finished the fight with the cannon. Next was the Godskin duo. This is the most aggravating boss so far. I was really hoping that somehow this build was going to make this fight surprisingly easy, but I was fooling myself. I'll explain how I approached this fight initially. I still had my volcano pots and freezing pots. I noticed early that my volcano pots were pretty garbage because the boss is resistant to fire damage. It's not the first boss that was resistant to fire, so I was hoping they would still get me through the fight. Quickly noticed that my puppet was getting killed around the same time one of the Godskins would die. This is because it was usually fighting one of the bosses and I'd be fighting the other. If the bosses were both distracted by my puppet, I would fall back and shoot my cannon from a distance, but would usually only be able to get one shot off. If the boss did aggro to my puppet, they usually killed him pretty fast. I needed to focus on fighting just one of them, so I added sleep pots to my arsenal. Now, the Godskin Noble, the bigger boss, is a lot easier to hit with pots. The small one is obviously smaller, so it's harder to hit him, but the small one also dodges all the time. Trying to hit him with pots or the jar cannon is a pain because he will just jump out of the way. So the plan was to put the Apostle to sleep and focus on doing damage to the big one. This duo is very susceptible to sleep, so one pot does the trick and they sleep for a very long time. Long enough to take down their partner before they wake up. This was working, but still wasn't enough. By the time I had used most of my pots, the boss still had half its health. I needed to change my strategy. I decided to use bleed and poison to beat this duo. I went and grabbed the Swarm Pots cookbook from Mogwin Palace and I respec'd my build into Heavy Arcane. The play was now Swarm Pots, Freezing Pots, and Rot Pots, which I had to use just when the moment was right because I don't want to spend a bunch of time farming the super rare butterflies needed to make them. I still died a bunch after making the change, but eventually got the boss one hit away. I think the screaming that followed this was justified. I knew it could be done, so I went again. I started off by doing damage with the jar cannon solo. After doing some damage to the big guy, I summon my puppet and then I start using my swarm pots. I can do a decent amount of damage while the boss transitions into his second phase. As the large one does his rolling attack, I can hop onto one of the destroyed pillars most of the time and he gets stuck on the pillar because he can't really roll up. This is not a guarantee, but it works for me here. It's safe damage, so I use my cannon for this to conserve pots. Once a big one is down, I help my puppet take down the other one. Another perfect opportunity for damage is when they start summoning each other back. I can get a headshot on them for about 1000 damage. I'm halfway through the fight with my summons, so I think I can safely use my rot pots. It takes 2 in order to rot the big guy. My summon finally dies while the boss is still at about 1/3 of its health left. I'm not risking anything at this point. I spend a good amount of time just running away and dodging while the rot does its job. Big guy goes down and I throw swarm pots at the small one until the fight is finally over. I need to grab a few things to finish off this build before the end of the game. The first thing I went to grab was the Beastman's Jar Shield. Not sure if I'll actually use it for anything, but I keep it on me just in case. Next, I went to the Great Jar in Caelid and fought the Knights of the Great Jar in order to receive the Great Jar's Arsenal Talisman. These knights were incredibly annoying to fight. I died a few times because these duelists dodge away from my pots easily and the cannon takes forever to shoot and reload. Also, I found out that the duelists that get summoned are builds from other players. I was wondering why even in PvE I was getting attacked with Moon Veils and Rivers of Blood. If you start the game in offline mode, however, the knights that are there are a set build and don't change. I decided to do this because I don't want to deal with fighting meta PvP builds with my goofy pot setup. After I did this, I was able to take out the knights and get the talisman. Last item is the companion jar talisman. I head over to Alexander and fight him in order to progress the quest. After I receive his innards, I go back to Jarburg to progress Jar Baron's quest line. Once I've completed his quest, I receive my reward. We're getting to the end of the run and these bosses do not play around. Malekith is next on the list. I didn't die to him as much as I did the Godskin duo, but I still had a few angry freakouts. I went in trying to use my volcano pots for a majority of the damage. The first phase was fine for this. He does move around a lot, but there are several attacks that he stays pretty still for, and the volcano pots do a decent amount of damage to him. I also used some freezing pots for easy damage. My puppet also did a decent job applying poison to him in the first phase. Second phase was a different story. It's so hard to find an opening for a pot, let alone having him stay in the AoE of the volcano pot. Also, I don't know what this is, but it pissed me off. After many tries, I decided I needed to ditch the volcano pots for the second phase. So the new approach was volcano pots and freezing pots for the first phase, and fire pots and freezing pots for the second. First phase was simple enough, just dodging the rock attacks and throwing my pots around the times he does a longer wind-up move, or when he's focused on my puppet. The next part of the fight, I spent a lot more time being cautious. There are only a few moves that I can throw my pots on. I can hit him after he charges at the end of his long-range slash combo, after he jumps back from his AoE stab, and whenever he's fighting my puppet. He was one hit left and I had no pots left. I was trying to get my puppet to attack him, but he just kept backing up. I go for a stupid cannon shot and I'm punished for doing so. I back off and wait until he's aggroed on my summon and take the final shot. Gideon was not an issue even for this build. He dodges a lot of the pots, but I spent most of my time at a distance shooting my cannon when he would charge up a spell. My summon distracted him most of the time. Godfrey was a really hard boss to beat with this build. I decided early that I wanted my summon alive for the second half of the fight, so I did the first half solo. Doing damage with the jar cannon before he has the large area slam was surprisingly easy. Right when I enter the arena, I take aim and try to land 2 headshots. From then on, he starts to duck and charge at me as I shoot. So if I keep aiming at his head or even his chest, he just ducks under the shots. However, if I aim at his balls, he will duck and charge at me and his head will be right in line with the bolt. So I constantly create distance between us, aim low, and do about 1000 damage for each headshot. Once I do enough damage, he will power himself up and start to do the large AoE stomps. As he's transitioning, I take the opportunity to throw 2 poison pots at him. Then I need to do a lot of dodging and can really only throw pots when he has a long recovery from some of his attacks. By the way, the other pots I focus on using are fire pots and freezing pots. Also rot pots for just the right moment. Something super annoying that was happening a lot was seeing my pots go right through the boss. That, and I guess some go through his legs. Either way, I don't think hitting this giant man should be this inconsistent. Once I've done enough damage, phase 2 starts. This was the phase with the most deaths. I start off by running back a bit after the cutscene and summon my puppet. The goal here is for my summon to provide as much damage as possible and get his attention here and there. I can inflict frostbite on him again for decent damage. When he starts powering up, it's time for the most important pots in this fight, the rot pots. I need to make sure he's stationary while throwing these because they are hard to farm. Once he is successfully rotted, I just focus on dodging while he slowly dies. I find a couple openings at the end for fire pots and use them to finish this fight. Before I even enter the boss arena, I came up with a strategy I would be using. Now, I start with Elden Beast. Elden Beast is immune to all status effects, so things like rot, frostbite, bleed, and poison are all out of the question. I only want to farm for easy materials if I have to, so I stick with volcano pots and freezing pots. Once again, I won't be using freezing pots on Elden Beast, so I can focus all of them on Radagon. My summon also mostly uses status inflicting pots, so I decided it's most beneficial to summon him for Radagon. Elden Beast is also very resistant to all elemental type damage, so my pots are already going to be the least effective thing I can use. He is, however, weak to physical damage, and that's where the trusty cannon will shine. I go into the fight and summon my puppet right away. I then start with 2 freezing pots and switch to volcano pots. After dying a few times to Radagon, I'm pretty good at dodging his attacks, and I needed to be good because I would like to have as many flasks for the Elden Beast fight as possible. He leaves me a few openings after he attacks where I can throw my pots. It's also really easy to do damage to him when he's focused on my summon. Overall, Radagon takes a nice chunk of damage from volcano pots. Between all the slow walks and the distractions, I can take down Radagon. Next is what I consider the harder part. Right as I skip the cutscene, I run up to Elden Beast and shoot a normal bolt at him. Then I immediately run behind his leg and shoot him again. This is some easy damage as he always starts with the same attack. My entire goal for the rest of the fight is keeping a large distance and shooting my cannon when I have a large opening. This large opening does not come often. I notice I don't have many options to do damage if I also want to play the fight safe. The best move he does is the ranged slash attack. I can dodge this very easily. Once I dodge all 4, I can get an easy shot in. Sometimes, if I'm at the right distance afterwards, he'll use the wave of gold attack. I have time to run away and then stop at the edge of the attack range and get another shot in. Other than those attacks, I'm spending the rest of the fight running and dodging the other attacks until he does the 2 safe ones for me. This is a very slow fight, but it's really the only way I can safely use this cannon. At half health, he starts to use his worst attack, Elden Stars. Several times I would basically no-hit to half his health, then he would use Elden Stars combined with another attack and I get obliterated. After dying a few times, I eventually got better at dodging the stars and even made use of the shield by blocking a little bit of the attack as I ran into it. I ran out of regular bolts and switched to my lightning bolts, which only do slightly less damage. After 16 minutes of just fighting Elden Beast, the bastard tries to go for one last Elden Star, but I'm not having it. I mend the Elden Ring and can officially call myself the Lord of Pots. Even though I beat the game, there's one more boss I need to test my might against. I easily dealt with Loretta as I pretty much fought her before, just have to dodge some more spells with the real version. I ran past everything and challenged Melania. It's no surprise that this fight was going to be awful. I tried so many different tactics. I tried using my puppet, using Mimic Tear, holding my jar shot until she started an attack, throwing pots, and even praying to see let me solo her summon sign. For a while I would wait for one specific attack and hit her with a headshot. I could barely get her half health, and if I did I would mess up a roll and she would regain health. I eventually found a fellow pot, but it wasn't enough to take her down. During all these attempts though, I did get a lot better at dodging her moves. Eventually, thanks to a video by It's Always Sunny, I learned a nice trick with the jar cannon against Melania. You see, Melania is one of those bosses that will dodge your arrows, bolts, and throwable items. Even unlocking and manually aiming, she will dodge out of the way. However, if you aim your body facing her and adjust the position of her health bar where one of the ends of it is lined up with her, you can pull the trigger to start the shooting animation and then lock on the boss, and for some reason she won't dodge out of the way. This was essential for this phase of the fight. I could start this strategy at the beginning of the fight and completely deplete her health bar with no worry. The second phase was a bit different. In order to continue this tactic, I would need a bunch of other buffs that I just don't feel like obtaining and don't go with the build. I tried the health bar adjustment like normal, but for some reason it wouldn't work after the first shot. She's also a lot more aggressive in this phase, so I can't create the distance I need to get another shot. I was dying a lot in this phase. I eventually gave up on the tactic and decided I would use volcano pots and frostbite pots for the second phase. When she does her large flower move, I use the chance to throw as many volcano pots as I can since she is stationary. After that, I learned that I could only attack on the moves where she slams the ground and a geyser of scarlet rot appears. Other than attacking on those moves, I spent a ton of time running away and dodging. To put it in perspective, I spent 18 minutes just in the second phase of this fight. At about half health, she seems to do the flower move even more. This opens the opportunity to get in a couple jar shots. Thinking about it now, I feel like swarm pots for the flower move would have been better, but oh well. I ended up using all my pots and the boss was of course one hit away. I rolled and ran for almost 2 minutes just waiting for her to use the flower move one last time, and I took the shot. Lord of Pots was able to beat the hardest boss in the game. The run is officially complete. My final level was 111. Overall, I had a good time with this run. It taught me a lot about ways to fight different bosses and showed me how cool of a weapon the jar cannon is. It may be very slow, but it can definitely shine in the right circumstance. Also, the jar right puppet was surprisingly good. There are a few spots that I think could have gone smoother if I switched up strategies, such as using more sleep pots on the Godskin duo or using swarm pots during Melania's flower attack. Not sure if I would recommend anyone use this build, but if you want a challenge for your run, go ahead. I'd say the largest negative this run has is the farming. It took up a lot of the overall time for this run and was the least enjoyable part about the build. Also, thank you to everyone that has been watching the series unfold on TikTok. It means a lot that you're all interested in the run and there are more builds coming. If anyone else is interested, the link to my TikTok and other socials are in the description. Hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.